The city was a sprawling, indifferent beast, and my new apartment was a quiet, forgotten corner of it. I had moved to escape the ghost of a past I couldn't outrun, a failed relationship that had hollowed me out and left me adrift. The silence of my old life had become a suffocating shroud, and I craved the anonymity of a new place, the hustle and noise of a city that didn't know my name. This new building, a grand but crumbling Victorian relic, felt like a place where forgotten things came to rest. Its high ceilings were cracked like old porcelain, and the air was perpetually thick with the scent of dust and something else, something cold and lonely that clung to the floorboards. My apartment number 4B was at the end of a long, dark hallway. The floorboards groaned underfoot with every step, a symphony of age and sorrow. I spent my days as a freelance graphic designer, and my nights were a solitary cycle of screen glow and takeout boxes. It was during one of those nights, around 3 in the morning, that I first saw her. The room was unnaturally cold, a sharp chill that cut through the summer humidity. I shivered, thinking a window was ajar, but when I looked up, I saw her. She was standing at the threshold of my bedroom, a spectral figure in a flowing white dress, her form almost translucent in the faint glow of my laptop screen. Her hair was a dark cascade around a face, so utterly desolate it was like a black and white photograph. Her eyes, two hollow pools of sorrow, were fixed on me. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. A raw primal fear seized me, freezing me to my chair. She simply stood there, a silent statue of grief. And then slowly she raised a hand. Her finger, long and thin like a sliver of bone, pointed to the floorboards right at her feet. A single pearlescent tear tracked a path down her cheek before she dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind a cold spot that made my skin prickle with goosebumps. For the rest of the night, I sat paralyzed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, an exhausted hallucination, anything but a ghost. But the cold spot where she had stood lingered long after sunrise, a physical reminder of the surreal encounter. The next morning, driven by a need to talk to someone, I found my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, in the communal garden. She was a woman of at least 80, with a face like a dried apple and eyes that held the history of the entire building. I hesitantly told her what I had seen, my voice trembling with a mix of shame and terror. Mrs. Gable simply let out a dry, rattling laugh. "Oh, that old thing? Don't you mind her. She's been around for as long as I have, probably longer. Just the building settling, dearie. You new tenants always get a bit jumpy." She waved a dismissive hand and went back to pruning a rose bush, a gesture that made me feel utterly foolish. The other tenants, when I mentioned it to them, shared a similar, knowing look and either laughed it off or changed the subject. I was alone in my experience, an unwanted witness to something no one else would acknowledge. But the hauntings didn't stop. They intensified. The woman appeared every single night, her silent, sorrowful presence becoming as predictable as the setting sun. She never made a sound, but her grief was a palpable thing that filled the room, a heavy blanket of sadness that made the air unbreathable. She always pointed at the same spot on the floorboards, her spectral finger unwavering. Once I saw a framed photograph on my desk tilt slowly to the side as she appeared. Another time, the faint scent of old roses would fill the air, only to vanish the moment she did. The terror was replaced by a strange, compulsive curiosity. Her gaze was not menacing. It was pleading. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to tell me something. I knew deep in my bones that I had to listen. One evening, after she had appeared and vanished, I moved the tattered rug in my bedroom. The floorboards beneath were just as old and dusty as the rest, but in that one spot they were strangely clean. The boards looked the same, but they felt different. They were slightly loose. With a crowbar I had found in the building's old utility closet, I carefully, almost reverently, pried up the section of flooring. Tucked into the dark, cold space beneath, wrapped in a brittle, yellowed handkerchief, was a small, tarnished silver locket. My hands trembled as I carefully unwrapped it. It was heavy and cold, and when I unclasped it, a wave of ancient sorrow washed over me. Inside, on one side, was a faded photograph of a young woman with a delicate, oval face and solemn eyes, the ghost. On the other side was a man in an old military uniform, with a kind face and a shy smile. Below them, etched into the silver, were 2 names and a date: Eleanor and Arthur, 1918. I knew then that I had stumbled into a very old and very sad story. I spent the next few days at the city's historical society and the old library, poring over archives and microfiche. It was like I was chasing a phantom through time. I learned the building's history, the tenants who had lived in my apartment before me, and finally, the name that had resonated with my soul, Eleanor Vance. The brittle pages of old news clippings told a tragic tale. Eleanor had been a young woman, a brilliant artist, who lived in my very apartment just after the First World War. She had fallen deeply in love with a soldier named Arthur who had promised to return to her after the war. But Arthur, like so many others, never came back. His name was on the list of the missing. She spent the rest of her life in that apartment, heartbroken and alone, waiting for a ghost to come home. The archives said she died in 1925, a year after she received the official news of Arthur's death, though her family believed she had died of a broken heart. Her body had been found in her room, curled on the floor, right where she always appeared. She had died clutching Arthur's locket, which had been a gift from him just before he left. The archives noted that her sister had later cleaned out the apartment, but the locket had never been found. It seemed Eleanor's final, desperate act was to hide the last piece of her love from a world that had taken him from her. I returned to my apartment with a heavy heart, the locket now polished and gleaming in my hand. Her story was a profound and crushing one. It explained everything: the unbearable sadness, the constant pointing at the floor, the desperate silent plea. She wasn't just a ghost. She was a love story that had never gotten its ending. I placed the locket on my bedside table in a prominent position, a silent promise that I would not forget her. That night she came again, but this time she was different. She wasn't just a mournful shadow. There was a softness to her form, a faint light emanating from within her. She moved slowly toward the bedside table, her eyes no longer filled with despair but with a profound, unearthly peace. She looked at the locket, then at me. A smile so fragile and beautiful it could have broken my heart all over again touched her lips. She nodded once, a gentle, grateful gesture. Then she began to fade, not into the shadows this time, but into a blinding silver light. It was as if she were being pulled upward toward something good and eternal. The room filled with the scent of lilies and the soft, silent music of a long-ago love. The cold, lonely draft that had followed me since I moved in was gone, replaced by a warm, lingering silence. And as the last shimmer of her form disappeared, I felt a deep, abiding sense of peace settle over the apartment. Eleanor was no longer a ghost trapped by grief. She had finally been set free, her story told, her love found, and her heart at rest. The apartment never felt lonely again. That night she came again, but this time she was different. She wasn't just a mournful shadow. There was a softness to her form, a faint light emanating from within her. She moved slowly toward the bedside table, her eyes no longer filled with despair but with a profound, unearthly peace. She looked at the locket, then at me. A smile so fragile and beautiful it could have broken my heart all over again touched her lips. She nodded once, a gentle, grateful gesture. Then she began to fade, not into the shadows this time, but into a blinding silver light. It was as if she were being pulled upward toward something good and eternal. The room filled with the scent of lilies and the soft, silent music of a long-ago love. The cold, lonely draft that had followed me since I moved in was gone, replaced by a warm, lingering silence. And as the last shimmer of her form disappeared, I felt a deep, abiding sense of peace settle over the apartment. Eleanor was no longer a ghost trapped by grief. She had finally been set free, her story told, her love found, and her heart at rest. The apartment never felt lonely again. The hollow emptiness I had carried within me, the very reason I had fled my old life, was gone. By helping Eleanor find her peace, I had, in a strange and beautiful way, found my own. Her forgotten story had given me a purpose, and by bringing closure to her tragedy, I had begun to heal from my own.